Welcome to part 5 of the King's Gambit opening course. Today we're going to be covering a dangerous line that you should be prepared for. This line starts just after Black accepts the Gambit. In our 1000 ELO and under database, Black plays this dangerous move just 8% of the time, while chess masters play it 37% of the time. The truth is, this line is dangerous for us, but few people actually know how to play it at this level. So enjoy the Gambit while you can, and be prepared for this anyways. The move I'm talking about, which has shown up in some of our previous lessons, is the move G5. If Black plays this, he probably knows what he is doing, but so will you after this course. As a review, the idea of this move is to play G4, attacking the knight. The knight is performing the very important duty of defending the H4 square from the queen. In similar lines we have discussed, we had the idea of just sacrificing the knight to get our pieces out quickly. But this idea really only works when the center is closed up and Black's pieces are restricted. Our other more common and solid idea is to play H4. This move serves to pressure the G5 pawn, but also opens the H file so our rook can defend H4, relinquishing the knight of his duties. That way, if Black plays G4, we can move our knight without concern. Since the center is open right now, we are going to go with the H4 option. Black has several options here we will consider. The first and most common, played over half of the time, is Black, carrying out his idea of G4, attacking our knight, so we have to move him away. This is okay because our rook is guarding H4 right now. So we move the knight to E5 because this creates the threat of knight takes pawn, which is also attacked by the queen. Normally it wouldn't be wise to move the knight into the center like this, because it can be chased away too easily. But in this case we have a retreating square that we would like to go to. So Black probably plays D6, chasing our knight, so we gladly retreat and claim a pawn. This position is fairly equal. We have neutralized Black's threats, and have reclaimed a pawn of material to make up for the Gambit. The best Black can do here is just develop his pieces and prepare for the middle game. However, Black will often get impatient and start throwing out random one-move threats, weakening their position. One example is the move H5. Yes, this attacks the knight, but this is an easy thing to deal with. We simply retreat, and Black's pawns are now pretty misplaced, giving us something to target. The other tempting move that is most common here is bishop takes knight, a mistake. We are forced to recapture with a queen, and Black just created a threat on himself, forcing us to put pressure on a pawn that is very difficult for him to defend. He can try with bishop H6, but we are just able to add an attacker like we have done many times before with D4. Black can delay us from capturing for a turn by attacking our queen, but we simply sidestep and then capture the pawn on the next move. Or he can try to defend the pawn, but the queen was previously preventing us from going to C8. So we switch targets from the pawn to the queen side. Black's only way to stay in the game is to move the queen back to where she just was, and we simply take the other pawn. Black has to move his knight to D7 to defend his rook. But here we have a really solid position with lots of pressure on Black, and I do not envy Black's situation in the least. Black has several more tries here, and we will continue in order of popularity. Black may identify that we are putting pressure on G4 and try to do something about it, rather than letting us just take it, which in many cases doesn't actually bode well for him. The next most popular move is G3, with the idea of getting his pawn off the G4 square to somewhere safer. And I love this line. We notice that this move opens the D1-H5 diagonal, leading to some ideas. We are now able to play the crushing brilliant move knight takes F7 with a 75% win rate. We fork the queen and rook with our knight. Black's only way to make himself not feel silly is king takes knight. In any situation where you sacrifice material to expose the enemy king, you need to play extremely accurate. Small deviations from the best line can allow Black enough time to get his pieces out and his king safe. Then we are just down a knight, which is not good. We need to find a winning line that efficiently gets us material, or a checkmate. So we need to get our pieces out quickly and do it in a way that doesn't allow black to get his out. You may see the bishop check, but this doesn't work because black can block it with the pawn, which opens a path for his bishop to come out. The other check you might consider is with the queen. Black cannot place any of his pieces on g6 to block the check, which means he has to move his king. He has several options. If he goes to e7, we can fork the king and rook, and we win more than enough material back to make the sacrifice worth it. If he goes to f6, this allows us to skewer the king and queen, and we go up even more. So black will want to avoid this square at all costs. He could instead try e6, but we can force the king to a more favorable square with queen to d5. And black has to go to e7, and we already know what to do in those situations. So that leaves one more retreat. King to g7 is black's toughest move for us to play against. It's now pretty difficult to get an immediate advantage as compared to the other moves. If we look for a check that black can't easily block, then we can keep forcing the king to shuffle around onto a more favorable square. Queen to e5 fails to the check-blocking move of queen to f6, and then we have literally nothing. So we play the other check, queen to g4, which black cannot block. Now the king has to find a new home through a minefield. He still can't go to f6. And he can't go to h6, because now the king is on the same diagonal as our bishop. We can open things up with d4 and get our bishop into the fight. So black's best move is to go back to f7, and now we play the bishop check we were thinking of earlier. Black has one way out of this, and one way only. If black moves the king to one of his available squares, he can quickly be mated. The only decent move uses the same idea as before of blocking the bishop with the d-pawn. This opens up an attack on our queen and our bishop at the same time. The only way for us to deal with this is to take the pawn, because it comes with check. Black can sneakily take the bishop with the queen, hoping to win our queen. But we can get out of it with the winning move queen takes pawn, because this also comes with check, and we will have time to take the queen on the next move. I like that this line demonstrates how bad it is having a king out in the open. We have so many tactical ideas like this, where we are able to get out of trouble by giving one of the many available checks. It is safe to say that the g3 pawn push was a bad idea for black. He has a couple other ideas, though, that are more solid. The next most popular being h5, with the idea of securing the g-pawn with his other pawn. This idea is an okay idea, but black still hasn't moved any of his pieces, having only played pawn moves so far. We can look for some attacking moves to punish this and come up with the idea of bishop to c4, attacking the f7 pawn, which now has two attackers and only one defender. Black can't defend it with the queen, because she and the king are too valuable to both be defending a pawn attacked by minor pieces. So the only other possible way to add a defender is knight to h6. But forcing black to move his knight to the rim of the board, like this, has already made our attack worth it. Black successfully defends f7, and we can't do much about it now, so we continue with our normal plan playing d4, to attack the Gambit pawn and claim the center. The other purpose of this move is to prepare the d3 square for the knight. Since black has blocked off our planned escape route of g4, we wouldn't want to lock our pawn in on d2. Most likely black will continue with his plan to kick our knight away, so we go to our newly prepared spot, which doubly serves the purpose of adding an attacker to f4, making it undefendable. Black can try to counterattack to distract us from this pawn. He may try something like bishop to g7, which attacks our undefended d-pawn. But if we take the f-pawn with our knight, it will open up our queen to defend d4. So that really just favors us. The more resilient response would be to try to get some compensation for the f-pawn by pushing it forward and attacking our pawn structure. We have to take, and if black takes back, we get our queen in the game, which is great, adding pressure on the strained f7 pawn. But if black is smart, he won't capture back, saying, "I don't want to get one of your pieces in the game. I want you to help me get one of mine in." We as experienced King Gambit players know to prioritize getting pieces out, so we also ignore the pawn tension and just develop with something like bishop f4. And really don't be afraid to let this tension stand for a while because it is not presenting any problems. To take the pawn would benefit black in his development greatly, and we just want to wait for him to take to help us get our pieces in play. Okay, back to another line. Black can defend the pawn another less solid way. The g4 pawn now has two attackers and only one defender. It is important to be aware that the light squared bishop almost counts as a defender. If he can get rid of his d-pawn easily, then we should proceed with caution. However, he can't make too great of threats with his d-pawn immediately, so we should have time to evade the bishop. Also, the knight makes the threat of capturing our center pawn, but I will show you how we can get a solid position if he captures it. We don't have enough time to defend the e-pawn and maintain a pleasant and safe path for our knight to travel. So we can proceed with taking. If black takes our pawn, we can do what black has done to us in the last few lines and kick him away while opening our bishop. If black simply retreats his knight, we have a quick 1-2 punch with the queen moving to e2, giving a check, which will force a piece to e7, allowing us to capture the f-knight for free. If he retreats a different way, we just take the pawn and get our pieces out. The most dangerous move is the advancing knight move, rather than a retreat, and this is where things get crazy. The game can go south fast for either side. Here we play the unintuitive move bishop takes pawn, which seems to just blunder the rook. But if he takes, black has a piece in the corner, and the rest of his pieces haven't moved. We have pieces out, so we know there is some sort of attack. This brilliant combo starts with the queen check. If black blocks with the bishop, we have a crazy mate in 2 with knight f6, and bishop h6, covering all of the escape squares. So black probably wants to block with the queen, leading to a similarly crazy combo. We can give the king a check and force him into a royal fork with bishop takes c7. And we win the queen in exchange for the pieces we sacrificed. Hopefully we will be able to pick up the knight in the middle game. Here black could try to thwart this plan by preventing us from playing queen to e2. By giving us a check first, we have to block with the bishop. And now if black takes, we can use our pieces to create another devastating attack, starting with bishop g5, to attack the queen, and begin to block the king's retreating squares. The queen has nowhere she can really go safely, because we have a knight check coming. And the king will have to line up with the bishop. If she tries to escape with a check, we push c3 to threaten to capture with the pawn. If she retreats, we go through with the check and get our bishop out of the way so we can finally get our queen into the attack. Wow, what a line. This one may be worth going back to review a couple of times because it's like walking a tight rope. There is a winning path, but it's a small one. Moving on. Instead of taking the pawn, it is also common for black to take the knight. We have to recapture, but have to be very aware that our queen is on the same diagonal as the bishop. If black gets his d-pawn out of the way, we need to remember that we need to get the queen to safety first. For example, d5, the bishop now is threatening to capture the queen, even though our eyes are drawn to the center tension. We ignore that for now, getting our queen to safety and gobbling a pawn because it's there and allows us to support our e-pawn. Now black can exchange in the center if he desires, but we can simply recapture. So black usually tries to chase our queen away while getting his bishop out. A fine move, though we have a response that creates a threat and doesn't involve retreating. We can simply push our pawn, and black now has to waste a move responding in some way. He may try to pin the pawn to the king with the queen. This both prevents us from capturing the bishop, and it adds an attacker to the pawn. 2 attackers and 1 defender, so we need to add a defender. The obvious way to do that is with d4. Only 4 games in the database have reached this position, but they all ended in a win. And the computer gives an evaluation of plus 1.5. We have such a strong hold of the center, and our bishops will be able to take advantage of the space we have gathered on the king side. Things are looking good. Let's cover one more tricky line that is common in this position. This line is very solid, and we have to concede some of our attack. But on the plus side, playing it is very simple and still gives us an equal position. Black plays a sort of skewer with queen to e7. This attacks our knight, and our pawn if our knight moves. Ideally, we could keep our knight here, but we know black can play d6 at any time to kick away our knight. But might as well delay that a move so we can get our d-pawn where we want it before retreating. So we play d4 and support our knight. Obviously, black can play something like d6, and usually does here. There's nothing we can do to save both our knight and our e-pawn. So we get out and take what we can. We get a pawn, and black gets a pawn. Now would be a catastrophic time to block the check with the bishop, because our knight will be hanging. The bishop is pinned, and our knight is being attacked. So instead, we block with the queen. And yeah, our knight is still technically hanging. But now black's queen is hanging, completely undefended. So he needs to do something about that. If he takes our queen, that puts our bishop in the right place to defend our knight. Black can try something tricky where he moves his queen to a square where it is defended so that he can then capture our knight if we forget about it. We, of course, won't forget about it. We get the queens off the board and get our knight to safety, hoping for a strong endgame. The evaluation here is dead even. There's plenty of game ahead, but the winner will probably be decided by good endgame play. I think that's about it for g4. While g4 is by far the most common move, there are several other really testing lines to be aware of. The next most common move, thankfully, isn't so testing. Black tries to support the g-pawn with f6. The problem anytime an f-pawn is moved is the very weak diagonal leading to the king, which can usually be taken advantage of with the queen. The problem, of course, is our knight is blocking the way. So we have a fun tactic where we sacrifice the knight to open up this diagonal. Black recaptures 98% of the time because if he doesn't, well, he just loses a pawn, so he'd rather go down fighting than admit f6 was a mistake. Taking makes matters worse, however, because we are able to begin a devastating attack on the king. The king has only one square, so he goes to e7. We are able to capture the g-pawn and give another check. This works because if black blocks with the knight, he pins himself. We can push the pawn to win the piece. If he tries to retreat, we can capture his queen. If he tries to retreat and defend the queen, we have the classic king and rook fork. However, we don't want to play this immediately because black could block our check and get a piece out, which isn't terrible for us, but there is a better way. We patiently give another check, forcing the king to e7 again, and now we play the fork. And black is forced to move the king again, leaving all of his pieces on their starting squares. We claim our prize, and it's important to check that the queen can't be trapped in the corner. We are safe because after bishop g7, the pawn is still undefended, and black is horribly lost here. A more resilient way to support the g-pawn would be with the h-pawn, to keep the dangerous diagonal closed. So black may play h6, and we can simply take the g-pawn. Because the h-pawn is pinned, we would be able to get a free rook if he recaptured. So black defends the rook, and our pawn keeps traveling down the board. We trade pieces, and continue with our plan, worry-free as long as the knight remains on f3, defending the h4 square from the queen. Now we just get our pieces out and castle long, and we have a solid middle game position. Okay, now what if black takes our pawn? We are now safe from black kicking our f-knight away, because he has no pawns on the files on either side of the knight. Black has a very weak pawn structure, and these pawns will be targets the rest of the game. Yes, we could capture the h-pawn immediately, but this pawn is no threat. As King Gambit players, we know it is important to get our pieces out fast, so we ignore the boring h4 pawn and continue with our plan as normal, getting pieces out and targeting the f4 pawn. Now we just develop something like this. And we have a huge lead in development and a formidable center. We have covered all of the most common lines, and you are now ready for over 90% of games in this position. However, we haven't talked about black's most dangerous move. This move is almost never played at this level, but it is the computer-recommended move, and it pays to be prepared for these kinds of lines in case your opponent has done his homework. So we will go through a likely scenario real quick. d5 immediately undermines our center, challenging the e4 square. Here we just need to remember the response d4, ignoring his threat and carrying out our normal plan. We don't want to take his pawn because that helps black get his pieces out. Black will probably take our e-pawn. If he pushes g4, we can proceed in a similar way to the g4 lines we discussed, going knight to e5, attacking the g-pawn. But if he takes in the center, we can capture the g-pawn on our evacuation. This move also attacks the e-pawn, and black needs to deal with this somehow. He tends to play a weak e3 pawn push, giving us the time we need to get our pieces out before his, and pressure the weak f7 square. We have two attackers, and black is only defending with the king, so he has to bring his knight to a weak square to defend. And now we compound the pressure on the f-file while getting our king safe with a kingside castle. We have a lot of pressure building up. Black has to be careful. If he plays something like bishop e7, we are able to launch our attack. And once again, black is struggling to hold his position together, and we have a plus 3.4 advantage. Thanks for watching part 5. We covered one of the most dangerous moves in the king's gambit, g5, to which we respond h4. Black can go any number of directions which are dangerous for both him and us. With proper preparation for this move, I don't think it is something we need to fear. There are plenty of exciting lines featuring knight sacrifices and early checkmates. If you had the patience and determination to watch the video to this point, congratulations, you deserve a few King Gambit wins in the near future. See you in the next video.